can do it.
So I don't start with my introduction again. I'm Sandra Gesing, University of Illinois, Chicago, Discovery Partner Institute. So yeah, so this is the first session of the working group. And then it is under the umbrella of the Virtual Research Environment Interest Group, but I only cover it here. So the interest group is going on for over 6 years, and we had topic from interoperability and from transforming data into information to sustainability and communities, and looking at the next generation of virtual research environment. And so the sessions last week of the interest group was about looking whether fairness is sufficient for creating trust and foster critical thinking in VREs. And yeah, the interest group is with the umbrella function really that it has no end. The working groups are 18 months long. And so this working group today had its first session. We got just really also accepted by RDA as working group like 4 weeks ago, I think, or 3 weeks ago. So this is really the start of the working group. So most of you know maybe virtual research environments, science gateways, virtual labs, or platforms, or we call it now in Australia. Or you might have heard about a research portal or cyber infrastructure. So in this session, we take it really as a synonym. And if you look at different technologies in this space, so they are widely used complete frameworks, like you might have heard about Hydroshare, Werner, Galaxy, or also about RESTful APIs and frameworks that support some multiple programming languages and really give developers a chance to build their science gateways, like Tapas or Apache Avata. So huge science gateway frameworks in that regard huge because they have many users, like over 30,000 users, which also using standard technology or APIs, standard web technologies like Cypress. They're offering it as open source, and then you can reuse the interface implementation. Or you can have really also services, this provision of hardware in the background, like Cygap does that, or we have several Galaxy instances where computer centers are really offering the hardware and Galaxy then as science gateway framework. So the sessions or the lessons learned from the past is that approaches should be technology agnostic, using APIs or standard web technologies, or deliver a complete solution to be really successful. And community engagement is key. So it's not this, when you build it, they will come. No, it's more when you build it and you promote it and they trust you, then you come. There's a nice publication about research in that field. So we talked in the past in the interest group about examples of reference architecture. This is, for example, one. We looked into a higher level of services. What do science gateways or virtual research environment platforms provide? What components are really there for doing the research from the start to publication? And we looked at it. There are 5 high-level pieces, components of science gateways, and that is the infrastructure, really the infrastructure that is below the science gateway framework or the instance of a science gateway. Then there's the community. It's a huge aspect of a science gateway. So with collaboration, with contribution, with support. The services is really something the gateway framework then provides, like authentication and authorization, session handling, sharing of data, sharing of tools, sharing of workflows, dependent on what you really have in the workspace or each user. And it's workspace is about accessibility and domain-centric user interface, for example. If you look at Galaxy, Galaxy is one of the examples. You can directly share workflows with a group, you can make it publicly available, or you can even export it and import it in a different Galaxy instance. The other thing is about integration with Science Gateway. So a lot of the Science Gateway frameworks have APIs that you can get data in from the outside, or that you have in the integration really other tools or simulations. So Galaxy, use Galaxy as example again, you have a toolbox there. So you can integrate external tools into workflows, or just also start one of the tools to fulfill your research needs. So this is an example that is from the project in Europe from the VRE for EIC. And they developed also a reference architecture and focused a little bit more what can be components in a Science Gateway framework. And you see, this is like, you have the working space, the workspace, so the higher levels on the communication bus to connect all the components like a node manager, a resource manager, a user manager. A query manager is then about the data, or a workflow manager if you have a workflow. So these are, ad manager would be something like tools or simulations. So, and it's also authentication manager, you can see on the right-hand side. So you see, the ideas are very similar, but this splits it up more really in the direct components a system needs to deal with the different components, like data model mapper or metadata manager is something very concrete to help with the collaboration and sharing data. And by the way, you can interrupt me if you have questions or comments. I don't always see the chat here because at the moment I have only one screen here. So just raise your hand or interrupt me, that is totally fine. So if we look at FAIR, so it's about findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And this is the standard publication about the FAIR guiding principles that came out 5 years ago. And so since then, a lot of things happened in the space regarding FAIR. So for example, FAIR for Research Software has published their position paper last year. And so there's also a working group going on at the moment, FAIR for Research Software. So we are all, I'm also a part of that working group. And it's really further developing, looking into the details, how to support the full ecosystem. So if you look at FAIR for virtual research environment, why do we need also FAIR for virtual research environment? There is, for example, already the FAIR for Research Software working group. And we have several levels of complexity of FAIR in Science Gateway, as I showed the reference architecture. They're different. It's not only the research software, it's not only the Science Gateway framework itself, it's also the content of the Science Gateway, or of a virtual research environment. So if you would look at the Science Gateway framework itself, like software frameworks, yes, that comes really directly in the space of FAIR for Research Software. But then we have research objects in virtual research environments, like we have data, we have workflows, we have simulation and tools. And this is then again a totally another layer of complexity and also of FAIR. So if we know, for example, oh, we would think this software framework is FAIR, it is findable, it's accessible, it does all the aspects. That doesn't mean that everything in the virtual research environment is also FAIR, whether it's shared in a way that it's publicly available, or whether the workflows are also findable. So that is a different layer also another complexity are the services which might be included in a science gateway. And the other thing is the external accessibility via APIs. And this also means that we need to have a look at these different aspects in regard to virtual research environments. And also with the collaboration tools and with the community aspects, with the sharing inside Science Gateway, that is a different level. But we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Of course, in this working group, we are aware of a lot of things which are going on. And this were all and these are not all, of course, what's going on regarding FAIR and which might be related to virtual research environment. But so at RDA, the different working groups on FAIR, there's a lot of going on in the space. So not only the FAIR for research software and this working group, but also FAIR for different data aspects and then RDC. So we will see a demo also of some of the projects to look into FAIR metrics. GoFair is also looking into FAIR and research software and virtual research environment. And US GoFair, for example, looks at the moment into aspects like batching, so that there can be a batch how FAIR maybe research software is. The Science Gateways Community Institute is looking into, with the working group, into 10 rules of making research software fair or virtual research environment fair. And then you can see FairShare or fairsharing.org are already tools, assessment tools you can use to test FAIR for virtual research environment. And there's a working group in the Netherlands that looks into FAIR for workflows, which is also part of virtual research environment in that way. That workflows can be part inside the Science Gateway, the virtual research environment. And then there is a FAIR AI working group, which is also very interesting to look at the specific topic, because AI method and tools are also used in virtual research environment. But so this aspect, the results of this working group, of course, we also would like to visit or revisit and see what we can add for virtual research environment. And with this was my introduction. So do we have any questions for you? Thank you very much, Andrew and Carrie. So there is, our notes document. And if you have any questions, you can add that in the chat. You can also speak up at the moment. Otherwise, I will stop this slideshow and jump to the video, because we have a demo recorded from a colleague who is on US time and is then joining tomorrow for the session. So that is Sean Cleveland. He has a lot of experience with different Science Gateway. He's a Science Gateway developer, and he looked into the activities for FAIR, and he did a really walkthrough to test the assessment tools which are already out there with FAIR assessment examples, for his gateway, for one of the gateways he developed. And if everyone, so I don't see a question, then I would start the video now.
Hello, my name is Sean Cleveland. I am a cyber infrastructure.
Do you hear the sound? Everything okay?
Yeah, it's good.
Great.
Scientist at the University of Hawaii, and I'm going to talk about some FAIR assessment tools that currently exist and applying them to our EKY gateway. So what is the gateway? EK means knowledge and Y means water in Hawaii. So this is a water knowledge gateway related specifically to groundwater for the state of Hawaii. The idea is to bring data and computation software tools together for researchers, as well as data products and visualization tools for the community, and then some decision support tooling in addition to this data and other tooling together for policymakers, so that they have access to better data, better tools, so they can make better decisions. So some of the things that we provide with our gateway is some interactive scenario exploration and data visualization. There's a groundwater visualization tool and a precipitation mapping tool. We have data management collaboration tools for the researchers to manage their data and its to publication. They leverage Hydroshare as a hydrology domain repository to push the final data products to. We also can handle launching and managing compute jobs and storing all the provenance about some of those analyses. And then we have public data access discovery tools. And this is all sort of served on top of a framework called Tapas that provides some of the public APIs. So this is essentially an NSF-funded open source scientific framework that supports research. Just really think of it as a set of the APIs that we'll talk about and some of the assessment stuff that Tapas is built on top, or the gateway is built on top of. And then Hydroshare is online collaboration environment for sharing data models and code related to hydrology, and it provides some of the DOIs that we leverage here. So now we'll get into some of the assessment tools. Okay, so we'll talk about the Australian Research Data Commons Fair Assessment tool. You can find it at this URL here, and so we'll just get right into it. Okay, let's take a look at the Australian Research Data Commons Fair Self-Assessment tool. So you'll notice it's just a HTML page here. We start with a little intro at the top. We scroll down and we get into the actual form tool here. So it has sections for each one of the FAIR areas. So findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable here. And there's a few questions to answer under each one. To note, as you answer these questions, they're all set to the lowest value they could be. So this is kind of a status bar. So if we were to look at, does the data set have any identifiers assigned? See, there's 4 options. If we choose a local identifier, the bar fills a little bit more, fills up, and then web address a little bit further, and then globally unique ID, like a DOI, fills quite a bit. So if we use this tool to assess the EQI gateway here, just looking at, say, a data set. So if we look at, say, something like groundwater chemistry, nutrient data set, we know that it has a DOI, and it also has a unique URL that you can get to access the data set and identify the data set. So we can choose the highest option here. Is the data set included in all metadata records describing the file? There is metadata that is included as a JSON document. If we were to say, download this JSON document, we could see that it has the UID in the document itself. So we'll put yes. How is the data described? Is it brief title and description, build comprehensive but in text-based, non-standard, comprehensive using recognized formal machine readable format? So we use JSON to describe our objects, and then we take the JSON objects and render it out to text for visual stuff, so we can choose the highest one. What type of repository or registry is the metadata recorded in? So we have some options here. Local institution, domain specific, generalist public, or is discoverable through several registries. So actually for ours, we can say it's several registries because this DOI is actually registered to Hydroshare, which is a domain, kind of a domain specific public hydrology place. But so not only do we have metadata records in our system, we have metadata records at Hydroshare. And that links back to our data. So the data is located in one gateway, but it's linked to and discoverable through Hydroshare as well. All right, so we move to accessibility. So how accessible is the data? So can we access to metadata only, unspecified conditional access? to contact custodian, embargoed access, a de-identified modified subset of the data that's public. Is it fully publicly accessible to people who meet stated conditions, or is it totally publicly accessible? We don't have any restrictions, so it's the highest one we can choose for that one. Is the data available online without requiring specialized protocols or tools to access once it has been approved? So the options here are, it can be accessed by individual arrangement, file download from online location, non-standard web service, such as OpenAPI, Swagger, Informal API, or standard OGC web service. So we do have some standards, but we're using OpenAPI Swagger, so we'll choose the second one from the top. So while the metadata record, will it be available even if the data is no longer available? At this time, I would say yes, it will be, and we'll continue to keep this site up, and it's also has the metadata is also stored in Hydroshare. So there's two places where the metadata is actually stored. So say yes for that. Interoperability, what files and formats is the data available in? So in our case, this data set is, we look at it, this is an Excel data set for groundwater chemistry data. So it is in a structured open standard, non-machine readable format. I guess it depends on what you consider machine readable. Excel is, read by a lot of tools, so I would consider that machine readable. What describes the types of vocabulary, ontologies, tagging schemes used to define data elements? So some of the data elements we actually use, their options are no standards have been applied in the description, standardized vocabulary ontology schemas without global identifiers for those objects, or standard open and universal using resolvable global identifiers linking to explanation. So we're kind of the second one from the top because we use quasi's controlled vocabularies here, but we don't have actually the identifiers out to them linking it. So we're the second one from the top on that. How is the metadata linked to other data and metadata? So are there no links? Is the metadata included in URI links to related metadata and definitions? The metadata is represented in machine readable format, example, linked data, such as RDF. So we're not RDF, but we do have some links within our metadata to other data. And if you access it via the API, there's definitely resolvable URIs. Reusable, which of the following best describes the license usage? No license, non-standard text-based license, non-standard machine readable license clearly indicates what it can be used for. Standard text-based licenses or standard machine readable licenses, example, Creative Commons. So this one, the license here is actually Creative Commons. So we'll actually just choose Creative Commons, standard machine readable standard license. How much provenance information has been captured to facilitate data use? So partially recorded, fully recorded in a text format, fully recorded in a machine readable format. So in this case, I guess it depends. I would say we're fully recorded in a machine text format, or partially recorded. I guess partially recorded for this specific data set. There is information about where the data was collected. So there's metadata about each one of the wells. There's metadata about the variables here, because you can actually dive in and see what was collected. There's not a lot of narrative about exactly the method used to do all of the collection in this document here. So I guess we would say partially recorded here for that one. So, all right, so that is the assessment here. We can see that our bar here for total across fair is, fairly full. So that looks like pretty decent. Okay, this is the Fair Shake tool, and it's a system to evaluate the fairness of digital objects. So this is a little bit more involved. It has this concept of projects so that you can group a number of digital objects that you want to evaluate into sort of this project group. And it has this idea of rubrics, which are the assessment questions that you want to ask to evaluate the fairness of some object. So for instance, they have some here already for tool rubrics, dataset rubrics, and repository rubrics. So if I go to one of the objects that I already have for our EQI gateway, people who log into the system can actually assess my gateway or tool based off of whatever rubrics I've already.
Sandra, that's
Sandra,
frozen.
that appears to have frozen. Maybe Sandra's frozen.
Yeah, maybe we've lost Sandra.
Kerry is the host. Do you want to take over
Yes.
trying to, well, it depends. Screen sharing might be locked to her. No, it's gone away.
No, it's not. I just have to find where I downloaded that file to. I did it today, so it should be. Here we go. Okay, now let me just share and try and get to the right. Okay, I think I've got to the right spot. Share sound.
People who log into the system can actually assess my gateway or tool based off of whatever rubrics I've already assigned to my object here. So I made a tool rubric, or I selected the tool rubric to go with this in the assessment. Somebody could probably add some additional rubrics if they wanted to, but if they wanted to just do the assessment, this is the assessment. So it essentially takes the rubric and breaks out each of the questions, and then these are the responses that you can do: no, but, yes. And as you go up, these go from like 0% to 100% for each one of these metrics in the questions here. So just talking through these real quick, the tool has a unique name. Yes, it does. EQI is not, the EQI gateway is not anywhere else. If you do a search for it, the tool can be freely downloaded or accessed from the web page. It is web accessible here. So yes, it fits that criteria. It uses community accepted ontology. So we use some controlled vocabularies. I'd say yes, but, because we don't necessarily use the ontology, but we do use quasi controlled vocabularies for describing, say, the data sets. Tutorials for the tool are available. So our tools, individual tools, have some tutorials. So if we look at, say, our groundwater recharge tool, there's actually a tutorial that you can go to in the instructions. So, you know, that use case fits for us, but we don't have it directly off of the main homepage here. So we'll put a yes, but. Source code is shared in the public repository and is documented. So we're on GitHub and we have documentation about the source code, and the APIs that we leverage are from a project called the Tapas framework. And so there's documentation about all of this information here, as well as the source code for that. Previous versions are made available. So we don't actually do this because we provide the latest versions onto the page, I guess. I guess you could say, since we might tag some of our new versions in source code, so they could be gotten. This is a little more applicable to, say, like command line tools or specific tools that have a release and people run one time and get some results out of, versus something like a gateway or a repository. Contact information is provided. So we do have some contact info, and there's also the information about how you would cite this gateway here. So we'll say yes to that. The tool can be accessed programmatically. So we do have those APIs. I mentioned the Tapas APIs are well documented for that. The licensing is provided on the tool's homepage. So we do not actually have that on the home page. For data sets and some of the tools, there are license files available with the source code, or in the example of one of our data sets here that we looked at earlier, we do have the licensing available right there. And finally, this one here, since this rubric was originally designed for some of these like biological tools, like is there an NSC database associated here? So that doesn't really apply, so we put now. So so we completed just our recent assessment here, and then this updated our grid, so we could view all the assessments currently that have been done for the EKY gateway object here. So I've done about 3 and chosen some different things just so that you can see how this sort of looks in this interface. So that's the FairShake tool. It's a pretty decent tool for looking at doing assessments for these objects, I think. Okay, thank you very much. And we'd just like to acknowledge some of the funding that made this possible by the National Science Foundation and the Science Gateways Community Institute. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, so thanks, even though Sean can't join us right now, thanks to Sean for doing that for us. That was great. So he's done both the gateway, assessed FAIR for both the gateway using FairShake and, oh, Sandra's back.
I'm so sorry, the whole connection broke down. My router is still blinking and I'm on my phone now. Sorry.
That's okay. Luckily, I had taken Sean's advice and downloaded that video earlier today, so I was able to play.
Great.
Yes, so we've seen it. So did you want to say anything about that before we move on, Sandra? Or
so I just wanted them to add, so we tried also a little bit more automatic tool together with Sean, the fairsharing.org, but these were 2 tools which are very similar, looking at the assessment where the users or developers answer the questions themselves. So that is, yeah, that was the only thing. So that at the moment we are still at the beginning phase for the assessment tools.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. So what we thought we'd do now, I'm just going to put a link to the collaborative doc in there again, which has a link to the draft work plan, which I am going to share now. My screen again. Okay, hopefully you're just getting the draft work plan. So what the group is proposing to do, so it is identifying how VREs can and should be made fair. So fair, the VRE to be fair in itself, and also how it should enable fair for other digital objects. So that we're going to do that by investigating how the existing applications of the FAIR principles to other digital objects translate to VREs. So we're going to look at the proposed principles for FAIR for research software. How does that translate to VREs? How does FAIR for machine learning translate to VREs? How does FAIR for data translate to VREs? Then we'll identify any gaps in that work, anything that hasn't already been thought of. And we will then develop guidance for developers on making their VRE both fair and fair enabling. And we're interested in fair metrics and indicators for VREs, but it's not in scope for this working group, and could be something that a follow-on group could do. So so we were endorsed and became a group, working group on 25th of October, so very recently. And this is us initiating consultation with the community. And we want to know who's in the community. We need to engage with co-chairs of relevant RDA groups and VRE developers and other programs that work with VREs around the world. we'll define, hopefully by Feb next year, we will define the scope of work. So we need to identify issues in the application of FAIR to VREs, and identify commonalities and differences, and define the key questions that the community needs to engage on. So we'll produce a review document outlining this, outlining the issues that need to be addressed in defining FAIR. So this isn't the definition, this is the issues we need to address. I'm just going to bring the chat up. Yes, and Christian's said there will be some collaboration with the Data Fabric interest group. Yeah, that would absolutely be one of the ones that we need to engage with. So by March next year, we should have our wet plan revised. And by July, hopefully we have, again, a gap analysis done. So a document identifying how VREs can and should be made fair, and how they should enable fairness for other objects. And so when I say enable fairness for other objects, it's how does the data that passes through a VRE or is created by a VRE, how is that made more fair, not less? How the workflows that are used within the VRE or services that are used within the VRE, how do they become more fair, or at least not less fair? The next deliverable will, we are going to collect case studies on how to do this. So as part of guidance for the developers on how to make their VREs fair and fair enabling, we'll be collecting case studies. So if we need to create more guidance than just the document identifying how they should be fair, and the case studies, if that's not enough, we'll review that and develop further guidance, and then we'll create the adoption plan by December next year, and we will identify adoption examples, and that will form the recommendation for the working group, which will be presented at a plenary. It's due 18 months from the start is May next year, but it depends, May 2023, but that depends on when the plenary is in that year. I know there's one in October to fit in with Data Week, I think, International Data Week. So this document is linked to from our collaborative doc. We have, I'm just going to stop sharing a second. So what we want to do now is we want to define, refine the deliverables and the approach. So, yeah, Andrew, I will put another link to that document so that the proposed wet plan. Did anyone have any specific questions about that?
And only for the moment, this was a suggestion from our side. Sorry, Andrew, if you. So this is really now open for discussion, whether we should have other milestones, other deliverables, other steps in between. So that we hope is a discussion now how people think about the work plan.
Something just disappeared from the.
So I moved it down to the bottom to flow on from the collaborative notes. Sorry, didn't mean to scare you.
Thanks.
So I have a question. We don't have to take 18 months. We could do this more quickly if we wanted to. But at least half of the co-chairs for the group are going to be going on summer holidays soon. Do we want to try and accelerate it, or do we just say, yes, we recognize that we're going to have 2 lots of summer holidays over the course of the 18 months and we shouldn't put ourselves under pressure?
I'm a fan of, since we are all busy people, not to increase the pressure by shortening the timeline. If we are faster, that would be fantastic. And there's no reason, if we have already results, not to go to the next stage. Absolutely. But I think in the 18 months, especially since there are also at the same time new developments, I think keeping ourselves up on the toes to know what's going on in other groups, what is the outcome from, so for example, Fair for Research software. There will be some outcome in the next couple of months. We want also, of course, always to integrate. So keeping ourselves updated on results of the different working groups, I think is part of the work which does not end in February. It's a continuous step, and there will be interesting work coming out of it. So I think 18 months, if we are faster, fantastic. I wouldn't push for it, but I will let Carrie also.
No, I agree with that, Sandro. I think, I think it's going to take that long.
So,
and someone, that oh, so Andrew, you're typing that, you're the anonymous kangaroo.
So with the deliverables, for example, if you know groups we should also consider, look into, we haven't listed, I think that is also part of the work at the beginning to really, and I prefer to have more groups there than fewer groups. And if we then recognize, okay, they're looking at maybe a different higher level, or they're looking at different aspects which we wouldn't have or wouldn't consider in the next 18 months. That is okay, but I think at the beginning, really the work is to find out and try not to overlook one of the groups who are producing already results we could reuse. And therefore that is already a big step to know about also the different activities. Yes, Tom.
Hey, so one of the things that came up in the Fair for Us RS discussion a lot when platforms were in and out, or VREs were in or out at various stages, is this idea that one of the things that platforms or VREs are is an instantiation of software. And when you have an instantiation of software, you have, if you think of that as the digital object, that it has a number of properties, like it's a time-limited consumption of resources, it's the effort of a specific bunch of people for that period of time, and so on. Would those aspects, which are more kind of like instrument-like, would that be in scope for what you would consider part of a fair VRE?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that is a part of it. Therefore, I try to say it in a not scary way. I think virtual research environment has a lot of layers of complexity, and we probably cannot even address all the layers in 18 months. But I think that is exactly, we need to find out in the scope, in the discussions, what do we want to focus on? And therefore, we are looking for the feedback from the community. What do you really want to look into? So that is the idea, yeah. Christian.
Yeah, I really agree about this. We really need to define what we mean by VRE being fair, especially with the scope. Of course, as you say, we cannot probably address all the layers because the VREs are already composition of different layers. So I think we may have to use use cases or storylines to be able to assess what we mean by what we want to address with the fair aspects of the VREs. What are the most important part of fair that we want in the scope of this first 18 months? I think what's the most important for users and also for managers of VREs with respect to fairness.
I think that's a really good point, Christian, that what's the most important thing for users and managers is a really good way of focusing in on what are the most important parts. And to prevent us from splitting hairs and, worrying about, what a VRE is, I think, looking at what's important for users and managers, I think that's good.
I wonder also if there's a sort of negative way that you could, wait, I'm phrasing that terribly. I wonder if there are many components of this work, like quite a lot of it, where you can say, well, actually, that is really the work of a different working group. So in the same way that you've got, you can say that the software assets within a VRE, particularly the tools made available within those, they can be made fair by the owners of those assets. There are other parts as well where you can say, well, that's great, but that can actually be defined by a group just focusing on data or just focusing on software and so on. And then you might end up with this shell that is actually much easier to tackle and not so concerned with how the VRE is put together, but rather just the glue necessary.
Yeah, that's my hope, Tom. That is best case scenario. That's why we're starting with a gap analysis. I think that's absolutely the way to go. Otherwise, we'll end up covering the same ground that you guys did in research software. Oh, the other thing I was going to say, Christian, with what you said earlier about using use cases or storylines. Yeah, I think we're going to have to demonstrate what we're talking about using examples of different VREs, different types of VREs. So in Australia, we broadly categorize, so we call them platforms, not VREs, but we broadly categorized our platforms into 3 broad types, which has sort of gotten up to 5 now, I think, just so we could, and had examples of those so that we could, when people said, well, what do you mean by a platform? We could show them, and then that made it easier to have the discussion about the different components and the different things they did. So yeah, that's how I'm envisaging that we're going to have to explain what we're talking about.
Yes,
by example.
It's important because there's a diversity, because the targeted users and user communities are not exactly the same for all VREs. So it makes significant differences that we must take into account. I think that from that, I think it's visible also in the work plan, is that we can end up with a kind of table with different aspects that we want to tackle with toward the fairness, and also linked to the existing interest group or working group in RDA, such as Data Fabric and Fair for Research Software. But there may be others, as we have talked about. So I think a kind of approach like that can help also to for the scoping, and also defining where we need to work, in which aspect needs to be worked on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, we had a discussion also in FAIR for research software to look for, if you're, for example, one of the developers of the software or, you know, the virtual research environment, it might be not the right way that you yourself do the assessment, but it's better that someone who's using it does the assessment, for example, or there's something automatic, because there's always a bias. And it's easy, for example, for me to say when I have developed a framework, oh yes, I do all these things and I know where to find it. You know, like, and so to try to make it more, you know, or less biased at least. So we discussed maybe it's better if a user does the assessment instead of the provider developer. So aspects like that, I think, will come up definitely also with the different roles you mentioned.
I really agree with that, because it's like when we develop software and we try to debug it, it's always better that a user do it, because the user will use it in not exactly the same workflow as we do as a software developer, and bugs can be found. So this is the same thing.
Yeah, or, you know, when you review your own paper, it's just not the same. That doesn't work well. Yeah. So I think really distinguishing between the different user groups is a big thing we should add from the beginning. That there are different roles in the community, and that is good. That is, you know, that is how Sciencegate virtual research environments and platforms work. They are developed on the one hand side for a user community. And that is not always an overlap between developer and user.
I'm wondering about the FAIR enabling rabbit hole as well, because one thing that I've been thinking about from a software perspective is that many platforms are authorship platforms for software. So that could be that they are environments in which you can generate and make available tools for other people to use, or they could incorporate features such as a notebook environment where researchers can actually put down software, but like write software within the platform itself. And in theory, if you're talking about leaving it in a more fair or equally fair state, then that means incorporating features into those authorship environments that nudge people to publish and otherwise make available and make fair those outputs at the same time. Do you intend to go that far, or could you simply leave it as at this point, people should be aware of and apply such and such principles?
I'd like them to be fair. Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to go that far. It is, I think in terms of some of our platforms that are doing that, or VREs that are doing that, I think it defeats the purpose of them enabling that in a platform if they're not then going to be shared. Not entirely, but yeah, no, that is absolutely a goal. But then you're right, it will be a rabbit hole. How far do we go?
Yeah, because I mean, there's a simpler version of this, right? Like, say you are a platform that specializes in generating derivative data sets. Well, you could be fair enabling by capturing detailed provenance in the processes. You know, it's the workflow side of things where you can automate those aspects, and it's less about putting things onto the users and instead just having invisible stuff that happens behind the scenes that make the data outputs more fair as well. And they're very different things.
I totally agree to that, Tom. And but I think, like Carrie, for this working group is also finding out a little bit the scope and how far can we go. And maybe this is on the list of, for really doing a fair assessment for the also tools like Jupyter notebooks, everything, and and dashboards in a science gateway. We have to have maybe another working group to go really down this rabbit hole. But I would love to see in this working group at least to try to be inclusive as possible, and then maybe see in the scope, we don't manage, the 10 different things we are seeing and the 10 different categories, but we are focusing on this. And then the next step would be, what can we learn? That would be also one aspect, if we can then sort a kind of which are more challenging and which are maybe low-hanging fruits. If we have the low-hanging fruits, maybe this gives us also a better start for the little bit more complex cases from the lessons learned then. So that could be a strategy. But including it from the beginning in the discussion, I think is one of the goals we have, yeah. Andrew?
So 2 comments, Sandra. I know I asked the timeline question at the start. Let me suggest something which is kind of opposite to that, which is I've seen working groups try and do too much and then not actually succeed. So I think there's value, particularly having heard this discussion, I think there's value in defining, if you like, a core set of activity that we want to do and making sure we can deliver on that. And if there's more that needs to be done, or as Sandra, as you say, if there are new developments that come along, then we can think about spinning off a new working group to tackle those. So maybe we're better off not overcommitting at the start. The comment that I wanted to make, just going back to Tom's thoughts about, well, Tom's and other people's thoughts about the role of the VRE/gateway/platform in dealing with the fairness of stuff as it moves through the platform. Somewhere in the last 2 weeks, and I thought it was in the VRE interest group session, and I can't find it in the notes, but somewhere in the last 2 weeks, I've seen a slide where someone talked about platforms as being fair reducing. That is, as the data moves through the platform, they become less fair. Fair neutral, which means they're not any worse and they're not any better at the end. And fair enhancing, that as a result of the platform working with the data, the outputs become more fair. Oh, the fair's fair poster, according to Tom. Okay, I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it. It's still relatively coarse and granular, but at least lets you get a quick overview sense of whether this particular platform is making things worse or better.
Yeah, I love that aspect. Instead of thinking about as a complexity of the framework with its content, maybe it's really, we can see per content what happens to it. Yeah. I will definitely have a look at that poster.
And I'll go looking for the poster after we finish the session, link it to the notes.
Great. Thank you. So, yeah, we carried said this is the timeline we envision at the moment. So we are happy really to redefine any aspect of that. If people think, oh, maybe we need more time for that, or we need something. The other thing we wanted to ask, because we can do a lot of course, remotely with Google Docs and exchanging information. How would we in this group, the tendency, because the plenaries are always half a year apart from each other, to maybe have 2-3 meetings between the plenaries to give it a little bit momentum. Would that be something people would sign up for? And it doesn't mean that you have to come to every meeting. You can also follow notes then and, contribute in Google Docs. But yeah, we think that probably to keep a little bit momentum and keep the working group, running and creating Yeah, content. Okay, so Shaban, thank you. Yeah, I think meetings, just because a half a year is long, and if there's nothing like some points in between to nudge us, because we are all busy.
And
So
you get
it's
so
actually
much
going to
more
be
done when you can talk.
Yeah, you can. And it's actually going to be, I was going to say, well, let me say worse, more of a challenge over the lifetime of this group, because at the moment we have International Data Week in June of next year. We don't have another plenary scheduled next year. And then I believe the one after that, I don't actually think we have one scheduled in March of the following year of 23. So I think
No,
the next,
there's something scheduled for October 23. I looked on RDA's website, but
yeah, October 23 is the next International Data Week. So there's an IDW in 23 in Salzburg. There's an IDW in June of next year, and that's it. So I think we're going to have to work offline maybe every 2 months to keep things moving.
Yeah.
Maybe every 1 month. I don't know. 2 months would be fine for me, but depends what other people think.
So
sorry, I'll mute again.
Let's say if we keep it, for example, with the deliverables we have at the moment, I think we can, between the different deliverables, adapt it a little bit to that. So if we have, I've seen that we have in between like 2 months time. I don't think if we have a goal this 2 or 3 months, we don't meet three times between that, but 1 to 2 times probably, and also have maybe different time zones available, dependent, how many people sign up from the different continents. And when I look at this group, and my hope is, of course, that every one of you signs up, being interested and being here. That means we have already at least 3-4 time zones. So, so one of the strategies we have in one working group that we offer per month different time slots. One is good for Australia and Europe, and one is good for US and Europe, I think. Because we never have a good time for all three. It's not possible. So, and that doesn't need to be then every month, like in the other working group. But I think, between the deliverables, we probably want to adapt it, how much output we need. For example, if we want to write something, I would see that it's much easier to give it a start when we have met and discussed the structure and went through a first document, and after we can make offline suggestions. So thank you, Christian. You also agree we need meetings? Yes. So yeah, for the discussion, would we like to go maybe really in each of the deliverables just to say, is this a right, let's say, we made assumptions about the month, of course. Should we maybe discuss this in detail? Would that make sense for everyone? So, Carrie, can you maybe bring that up again?
Sure.
Yeah, so the first topic, our good news, we are endorsed. So nothing to change there. So,
and we are initiating consultation with the community.
Yes.
That's now, but that's something we have to, I was thinking we haven't mentioned so far, is we want to make this, we want to cover all of the regions. We want to make this truly international, because if we don't consult at the start. FAIR has different priorities in different regions of the world, from funders and organizations who are e-research organizations or digital research infrastructure organizations place a different priority on FAIR. So it's no good us saying, we think everyone in the world should do this to make their VREs fair, if people in, I think it's South America, might not actually be able to get the funding to do that. Whereas in Australia, if you write FAIR on a funding application, it's considered a good thing. So we need to consider the adoption early.
Yeah, the international one. Absolutely. We have also a co-chair from Mexico. He hopefully joins tomorrow in the repeat session. Yeah, I understand that he didn't want to get up at 1:30 so in the morning.
Yeah.
So yeah, but the initiation is now there, and that, as Carrie said, the different aspects of being very inclusive with it, of course, with a target audience worldwide, and then defining scope of work. And that is, for example, where I think until February, that is even a tough task to do.
Yeah, that is optimistic.
Yes. So, but I really think it's necessary, and I wouldn't feel too bad if we are not clear about all the aspects. For example, what we discussed already, can we really include, for example, Jupyter notebooks already in all the next steps? Maybe we don't know in February. Maybe we are just optimistic and we start to include them for other steps.
Yeah. And look, this is an outline document. I mean, it says a review document. It's reviewing the existing definitions and frameworks, but it really is just outlining the issues that need to be addressed. So we don't need to find the solutions. We just need to know what questions to ask, which even that could be optimistic by then. This could be something that should be something that is probably constantly updated. Really, we may find new issues as we go that we need to look at.
Yeah, I like that. It's more like a living document than, but something we want to have a start in February. And and try to be really, as Carrie said, to list everything from the different environments, from examples, to make it also clearer from the different continents. Use cases, I think, and try to collect really, to our best knowledge, most of all the working groups we know about who are in the space and doing something related. I think that is part also of the scope, that we don't repeat the work other people are already doing. And that might mean, for example, if another working group is also at the beginning, that we reach out to them and say, okay, what are your plans? What is your scope? So, and we leave it out of our scope. I think that is partially what will happen then, because everyone is still really quite at the beginning with this assessment work.
Also, in that document, I think it's important to take into account what has been said about the different types of VREs, to be sure that we are addressing what we that the definition of VREs that we have for those different types, or we agree on those definitions.
Yes.
Yeah, we have we have a definition in the case statement, but it would be interesting to see if that is broad enough.
Yeah, and that is the other thing. So these are suggestions we are making. If most of the community says, we have to reformulate that, we are very open to that. Sometimes it's really word tweaking so that everyone feels also included with their solutions and everything. So I think this is not in stone. It's really, we are very open to suggestions there, because it's a little bit sometimes a moving target how the developments are going. So okay, so if people feel comfortable that we define the scope of work by February, which is only 3 months, and with summer holidays for some people in between, and also a little bit end of year break for other people, at least a short week. So so the next step would be then really finalizing the work plan. So a month later, to look really at deliverables, so what are steps, what is the timeline. So I think it's doable in a month when we have in February defined the scope of work. What is the feeling of everyone there?
I think it's reasonable if we want to go on with what we want to achieve. I think having an outline by February is fine, even if we consider the holidays and the end of year break.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Do you have a long end of year break, Christian? Because we do, but
2 weeks.
okay, yep. Yeah, Australia tends to shut down for a considerable time in summer over Christmas for us. Yeah.
Yeah, you can party Christmas with palm trees in some parts of your country.
Yeah, but at least it makes it quiet around in the office if you're actually here. So then you actually get a lot of work done because no one else is here.
Okay. So that would be then the working session at the plenary is so what what Andrew said. So this is then the International Data Week in June.
But it's the RDA 19th plenary meeting, part of International Data Week in June. So
cool.
Yeah.
Maybe we can travel even too soon.
I was going to say, we could actually get there.
Yeah, I will see whether, I hope at that time I can already say again, oh yeah, I can go to the other side of the world. That would be nice. So that probably, let's say, it's a good timeline between March and June to have a working session at a plenary to prepare and also to show already more. That means we want to have some results. And
I think we can present, presenting a draft gap analysis. I think that'll be really good food for discussion and comment for the people who aren't necessarily involved before then. I think that'll be good. It'll be something for people to argue about, discuss.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so yeah, the gap analysis is exactly what Tom and Christian also talked about. What will be the scope, and we can hopefully show the ecosystem at that point. It's a moving target, yes, we know that, but at least the most important things which are related to our work. So I think that is a really good thing. Yeah,
it would be really good to have at that time some feedback from external people that are not, as you said, involved in this specific work. So I think think it's always good. It would be good for us to have some feedback about what we are doing, to be sure that we don't forget anything, or that we have our scope is not too large also. And that we address at least the most important thing.
Yeah. Yeah, and we want to be in the sweet spot, or we want exactly as working group in the sweet spot. It's doable, and maybe a little bit ambitious, but not too ambitious that we cannot really deliver results. So I think, yeah. Then
I think in the end, it will be probably an iterative process. We have a first, after 18 months, we have some good guidance on how to be fair for VREs, but then probably we'll have to revisit to add more things after that. But at least we'll have a first good definition of what how it should be.
Yeah, sounds great. So Tom, what do you mean with pull back the scope as well, to define it smaller? Or
all I meant was that if by the time you get to defining sort of guidelines, you find that all your energy is absorbed just by describing how to make data, the data components of a VRE fair, then you could at least pull back to that and say, well, in this first phase, we've managed to tackle in detail these aspects of VREs. And then as an outcome at the end, you can say, well, we suggest that a working group form that just focuses on workflow components, or, you know, something like that. So if it turns out to be a huge amount of work.
So the fair enabling side.
Not just the fair enabling side. It might be that what you find is that as you go around looking for exemplars, there are some really good examples of fair enabling platforms. And that gives you such a good model on how to do that, that becomes the focus. I can't tell you from the outside what's the low hanging fruit.
Come on, where's your crystal ball, Tom?
I'm sorry, it's broken. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I just mean that, like, you know,
yeah,
this is part of, you know, the fact that VREs have so many different instantiations mean that, you know, if you just pick a component that is common to a lot of VREs and focus on that, then that's a really useful outcome, you know.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. And that goes back to what Christian said at the start, is focusing on what's useful for the users and the managers. So yeah. So what's the greatest? Yeah.
The only comment that I'd, sorry, Carrie.
No, I was just gonna say, what's going to work for the greatest number of users and managers? Yeah, go.
The only comment that I would make, if I've not quite understood that one entirely, is that something that we just keep circling back on in the FAIR for RS discussion is that FAIR is really an action upon the owners or the creators of the objects that are being made fair. And that, you know, VREs incorporate a lot of components that are outside the control of the creators of those platforms as well. And so that puts a kind of limit on your ability to make fair some of the things that are in there as well. So you can't, for instance, if you are incorporating standard components in your VRE, standard software components in your VRE, and those components are not themselves fair, that's not really an action on you to chase up the owners of those assets and say, okay, sorry, but we're kicking you out of our platform until, you know, Jupyter Hub has been made entirely fair, for instance. And so that's a big limiter on the scope of what making a VRE fair is. And it's the same for software. So all the dependencies in software You know, the action is upon the software that you've created yourself, not the software that you've used in the creating of the software.
Yeah, because I suppose that's a question of when you're talking about a VRE, you know, a VRE is like an onion, it's got layers. How far down do you go? Are we just talking about the skin here? You know, the thing as a whole that a user sees, is that fair? You know, can you find it? Can you access it? Can you interoperate with it? Can you reuse it? You know, that's very different from going down to the constituent components, isn't it?
Yeah,
Oh,
well,
Tom.
again, it's no, but it's really simple, right? Did you make it or not, is the answer. If it's somebody else's thing, then you can only ask them to make it fair. That's about the limit of it, right? And if that's just something that came up time and time again, was a misunderstanding. And maybe you know, I assume you understand this full well, but what you might find with people interacting with the group is that they think that this is somehow like a top-down set of principles that you can apply on all of the things that go into a VRE. And really, you can. This is really only a set of actions that are possible to be performed by the people who can do them. Basically.
Yeah.
If that.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you see what I mean. Yeah.
I do. We have 5 minutes left, as Andrew has just pointed out. So I think the last bits that we were going to talk about was just signing up if anyone wants to sign up for a particular bit. But I'm not sure if yeah, Sandra, how do you want to go about that?
I mean, if people are already now on the call and say, oh yeah, I would like to be part of it and the specific bit, because we also thought like, if you sign up and you are interested, it doesn't mean that you're now signing up for the next 18 months, you know, for 15 meetings. And so you can contribute to the parts you are interested in. And, you know, be part of it at the beginning, be whatever fits for you. So one of the goals is, yes, you can sign up now. The other thing is we want to reach out also to the, of course, the interest group, because it has already a long list of attendees that people can still sign up in the next 3-4 weeks. Also, it will be anyway, you can also sign up in between for a task you want to.
Yeah.
That we have maybe a definition of a starting working group members, let's say in 4 weeks, after we reached out to the interest group members. Also, what do you think, Carrie, Andrew? Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Because I think we've got about 20 people have joined the group on the RDA, the groups page on the RDA. So that's good. They'll get communications. Yeah.
And we can, we make the sign up sheet also open if you want to think a little bit longer after the session today. That is also okay.
Yeah. But yeah. If there's any particular topic, any particular part of this that you're really interested in, please let us know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, is our message, that it's really, it has different phases, and you can join in and jump out at any phase that makes sense for you. And there might be also, like, you know, so in the summer, I know in the summer it's in France and in Europe a little bit more summer vacation, let's say in June, July. So there might be a phase some people from Europe are not so interested in to be online then. So yeah, 2 minutes left, and thank you for joining. Thank you for all the discussions and ideas.
Thanks to Andrew for taking notes.
Thanks to Sandra and Kerry for chairing.
Thanks, everyone. It was really interesting.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Is that your cat saying thank you, Siobhan?
Yeah, he just bought me a toy. He thinks I was bored because I was sitting at the computer. He's wrong. It was fabulous.
Or he's super passionate about fairness for VREs.
Oh yeah, fairness for very rodenty engagement. It's a little fluffy mouse.
Good on. All right, I'll go looking for that poster and add the link.
Thanks.
Thanks. Fantastic. Have a great day.
See you later.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Get some sleep, Sandra.
Yes. My internet already did sleep. Yeah. Bye.
Bye. That was good.